Another area we can borrow from is video games. We can learn a lot from video games, from how video games use interfaces and interaction design. A while ago, like 7 years ago, or something like that, I participated in a student project run by Professor Rich Beckman from the University of North Carolina. He's right now at the University of Miami as well. And with a group of students and with the help of a Spanish university, we spent a month in Spain, in the region where I was born in Spain, Galicia, doing a multimedia documentary project called The Ancient Way. And the URL for that project, in case you want to visit it, is this one, http theancientway.jomc.unc.edu portal. So you will have to type all that in your browser. So the multimedia documentary project includes video stories and audio stories about how people are in Galicia, what kind of things that you can find there, local culture, music, traditions, etc. And there is also a story about monasteries because, as you know, the way of Saint James goes through Galicia and it actually ends in Galicia. So Galicia is a very religious place. So there's a story here about monasteries along the St. James Way, which is quite interesting. But I'm not going to show that because it's a video story. The story that I would like you to see eventually is this one called Music is in Our Blood. Galicia has a very long tradition of Celtic music, medieval music. There are bands that play folk bands that play medieval music, and there's a whole industry around that. There is an industry made of, for instance, luthiers that recreate the instruments that were played in medieval times, and they actually recreate them for bands today to play them. And there are also bands, there are also festivals, etc. So this is a long story, video and audio story that tells you a little bit about Galicia's musical traditions. Part of the story, I believe, is how it blends different storytelling techniques. I'm going to increase the audio here so you can hear what I'm about to show. The most interesting thing for me is how this story blends different storytelling techniques, because you have the photograph, then there will be a motion graphic that explains how the instrument that is being recreated is being built, and then there is something else that borrows from the video game world. So let me just play the story from here. A descendant you will get a narration there. The instrument depicted at the apex of Portico de la Gloria. Narrated by a student. Still constructed by luthiers, skillful artisans whose work requires a long apprenticeship and dedication. And now the motion graphic begins, because you are going to see how the sanfona works. The sanfona is the instrument that is being built in the pictures. So eventually the photo blends with an infographic, with a 3D infographic. The sanfona produces sounds when its 5 strings are vibrated by the rotating wheel. The player uses one hand to rotate a crank and the other to play the keys. The sanfona produces a consistent chord played on the outer drum strings, as well as a melody produced by manipulating the 3 inner strings. And now, after the explanation finishes, you can actually play the sanfona. So you can click on OK, you can click on that to get started, and then you can use the keyboard in your computer, as I'm doing right now. I'm not very good at this, to play the sanfona. So this is a great way, I believe, to engage readers with your content. Try to bring things from video games and other areas. All the content for this graphic and for the entire website was produced by students, which makes this thing even more impressive. What the students did in this particular case was to talk with a musician, and they asked him to play every single note in the instrument. They recorded those sounds, and they created the interactive application. They also created the 3D illustration using a program that is called 3D Studio Max, and they finally created the application. So video games is a good place to learn from, I believe. But we can borrow from other areas. So for instance, think about Hans Rosling, for instance. Hans Rosling became very famous a few years ago after he gave a mind-blowing presentation at TED about social development and public health, etc. And I would encourage you to visit his website.
gapminder.com, particularly the video section. The video section is in there. If you click on that, I am actually going to do that to show you the website. So the Gapminder Foundation has a video section. By the way, Hans Rosling is a professor of public health in Sweden, and he's also the creator of that foundation and of a software tool that allows you to visualize different data, social development data, in a very efficient way. And his videos are just amazing. I'm not going to show them to you because I want you to explore them on your own. I would encourage you to start by watching this one, the one called Two Countries, 200 Years in 4 Minutes, which is quite impressive. And it's actually part of a documentary, a 1 hour long documentary he made for the BBC, and that you can also find here, called The Joy of Stats. It's a pretty interesting documentary, so try to watch that. Well, what Hans Rosling does in his presentations is to actually blend with the data somehow. He integrates himself with the data. So he presents the graphic, but then he starts explaining what the data mean, and that is a pretty interesting approach, because it actually addresses something that many data visualizations don't do, which is to tell readers why they should care about the data, or what is more interesting about the data, or what the main data points in the data set are. So he does that using language or using techniques that he borrows from sports broadcasts. I interviewed him actually for the Functional Art, and he told me that he tries, when he makes a presentation, he tries to speak as if he were broadcasting a soccer game. He speaks very fast and he makes jokes all the time. He's very engaging. So try to visit his website and try to see some of his presentations. I believe that they can be extremely interesting and also very inspiring for your future work. Well, that is all for this lecture. I hope that you liked it. Remember that that's my website, that's my Twitter account, and let's move on with the rest of the content of this course.